Hi, this is Kathy Ganatic. Today, I'm going to explore what it means to have a planet square the nodes of the moon in your birth chart or by transit. Ptolemy, the ancient Greek astrologer, referred to this as planets being at the bendings of the nodes of the moon. There haven't been a lot of traditional or Hellenistic astrologers talking on this topic, so it's a little bit new. And I hope that this presentation helps you deepen your understanding of the nodes in your own birth chart. And I'll give you the part of what I'm going to explore is the Vedic or Hindu understanding of the nodes, which I think is really deep and helpful when it comes to getting a sense of these really mysterious points in our chart that can have to do with karmic changes, let's say. When I say karmic, I simply mean those moments in our life where things suddenly seem to appear or disappear outside of our control, and there's a way in which it shifts our life or can shift our life dramatically. And that's part of the sense of the nodes of the moon. So I hope you enjoy the talk. If you do, it'd be great if you could like and subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to grow it right now. And also, if after this talk you find that you have a planet square the nodes of the moon, drop a comment and share what your experience is. That's one of the best ways to learn in astrology is by hearing other people's stories. So, what are the nodes of the moon and what does it mean when a planet is square the nodes? First, you can see here uh, that in this chart on the left, the moon is at the bendings, meaning it's square the nodes of the moon. Up here on the left, that horseshoe that's upside down is the north node. They called that Rahu in Vedic astrology. Down here, we have the south node, Ketu. And we're going to talk about what the nodes of the moon mean in our chart, and then we'll explore particularly the symbolism of when you have a planet at the bending. And I have a little image here of a deep sea diver coming up, right, from the bottom of the ocean floor, because there is something about a planet when it's at the bendings where it can be a little bit like getting the bends if you've taken a deep dive into the ocean and come up really quickly. There's something about rising quickly and falling quickly that can have to do with the bendings. And you'll see that in a minute when we talk about the symbolism. But first, let's talk about the astronomy, just so we're grounded in what's happening in the sky. So, the nodes of the moon are symbolic points. And you have two, well, first, you have the sun's ecliptic, right? It's when the path of the sun, it looks like from the standpoint of the Earth that the sun is traveling around the Earth, but we all know since Galileo that actually the Earth is traveling around the sun. In any event, that apparent path of the sun around the Earth is called the ecliptic. And then we have the path of the moon, the real path of the moon, the moon's orbital plane around the Earth, right? And when those 2 points meet, is when where the lunar nodes, these symbolic points in a chart, are happen. And we all know, or one of the things that to come to understand about the nodes is that when in a chart the nodes of the moon are within 15 degrees of the sun or the moon, when there's a new moon or a full moon, we're going to have an eclipse. And this is this moment when the sun or the moon appear to disappear from the sky. And in astrology, that was the very beginning of astrology, was some of the most obvious changes in the sky that led to symbolic understanding of meaning related to eclipses, because around eclipses, particularly solar eclipses, people started to notice that those were moments when leaders might fall from power, because the sun can represent leaders in the world, and you'd have an eclipse, and then all of a sudden somebody would lose authority or fall from the throne. You might want to check out the astrology podcast. They did a two-part series, total of maybe 8 hours, showing the correspondence between these major eclipse events and kings and other leaders falling from power over the centuries. So it's really interesting, that correspondence. And so that's what the nodes of the moon are in the chart from an astronomical standpoint. And then I'm going to do a quick explanation of the nodes of the moon in the birth chart. And we're going to tie that to the Vedic myth of Rahu and Ketu. I have a note here that this is an initial exploration, this whole talk, because as I said, or I believe I said, there haven't been a lot of folks who've talked about planets square the nodes. So we're opening this up and I'm going to give some examples and you can let me know what you think if this resonates with you. But going to the general meaning of the nodes in the chart, we'll look to the myth of Rahu and Ketu. And here's a picture. This is an image of basically the myth. And in the middle, you have um, so basically what happened we're going to see is the gods and the demons got together to try and create a drink called the elixir of immortality, and only the gods were supposed to drink of it. And one of the demons pulled a trick and took a drink, and then that and the story unfolds from there. And so that's the image we see here, where the gods and the demons are churning the Milky Way to create this drink that the gods are supposed to drink from that will give the gods immortality. And so I'm going to read the myth in its entirety. It's not that long, but it is good to be grounded in a story sometimes to really take in the deeper meaning of astrology. So the story of Rahu and Ketu begins with the churning of the ocean of milk. That's the Milky Way. And the story is called Samudra Manthan, and forgive my pronunciation. And in that myth, it was an effort, as I said, by the gods or the devas and the demons called the asuras to obtain amrita, the nectar of immortality. To churn the ocean, they used a serpent Vasuki as the rope and Mount Mandara as the rod. After great effort, a pot of Amrita emerged. The gods, guided by Lord Vishnu, wanted to keep the nectar from the demons to preserve balance in the universe. Taking the form of the enchanting Mohini, a woman, Vishnu began distributing the nectar only to the gods. Sensing the plan, a clever demon named Svarbhanu disguised himself as a god and sat among them. When Mohini passed the nectar, Svarbhanu drank it. The sun god Surya and the moon god Chandra noticed the disguise and alerted Mohini. Vishnu immediately revealed his true form and beheaded the demon. But because he had already tasted the nectar, the demon became immortal. His head became Rahu, the north node of the moon, with the drink still in it. And his body became Ketu, the south node of the moon, the headless body. Rahu and Ketu, holding a grudge, are said to chase Surya and Chandra across the sky, the sun and the moon. And during eclipses, they momentarily swallow the sun or the moon. When the sun or the moon are at that nodal point, that's when we have an eclipse and they appear to disappear from the sky, creating darkness we see from Earth. And this myth comes from various Hindu texts. It's repeated a number of times, and those are listed right there. So in Vedic astrology, Rahu, or the North Node, can represent our desire, obsession, and worldly focus. There's an idea in evolutionary astrology as well that it's where we're moving toward. I'm not a huge fan of the evolutionary astrology ideas around the nodes of the moon because they have this linear idea of moving from the south node toward the north node, that we're moving from past lives toward where we're intended to go. That seems a little bit too linear, just as a side note. I like the Vedic idea, which sees both the South Node and the North Node as being kind of shadowy points and difficult energies sometimes to deal with because they can involve deception on either the South Node or the North Node. We can be confused around the energy. They can have a mysterious, unknown quality. We can kind of see that from the myth here too, where both Vishnu is deceiving, right? By appearing as Mohini and trying to keep the demons from getting their portion of the Amrita. And then we also see the demon who's being deceptive as well, who he disguised himself as a god to get the Amrita. So you see the potential for some shadowy quality to both of the nodes. And for me, the nodes of the moon in our chart, wherever they fall, we can have difficulty with the south node letting go and be forced through karma, you could say, to let go if we're holding on too hard in that part of our chart. And with the north node, it can kind of be like that notion of the hungry ghost in Buddhism, where we go too hard. We have an obsessive desire for something in that part of our life. And the idea with the nodes of the new moon for me is that we find the middle path. We connect the head to the body, the spirit to matter. We take up this non-dual notion of reality, that spirit and matter are one versus being split. So together, the nodes of the moon can symbolize the tension between material pursuits and spiritual growth. Those are the two ends. We can split those as if the material is not spiritual and as if the spirit lacks materiality. And really, this non-dualistic notion is that we want to find that middle golden path in between. That's a little bit of, let's say, spiritual peace that enters into it. So if we look at Rahu and Ketu in our birth chart, just to repeat and give you some simple ideas around it. Wherever we have Rahu, we may go a little too hard toward material pursuits. We can have an ambitious hunger. There can be this desire that's not satisfied. Remember, the drink stays in the mouth and doesn't get to the body. It can also be about expansion and growth and sudden things appearing for us. In fact, in traditional or Hellenistic astrology, they very simply understood the north node of the moon to be about things coming to us, to expanding planets if they were near the nodes of the moon. They understood in Hellenistic astrology that the north node of the moon had the quality of Jupiter or Venus, the two benefic planets, whereas they understood the south node of the moon to have the quality of Saturn or Mars. So they saw north node is good and south node is bad. Again, that's not my sense of it. It's either one can create difficulties for us. Going to K2, K2 can be about a letting go. We can be forced to let go wherever K2 falls in it falls in our chart, wherever the south node falls. We may experience moments where we want to hold on, and where if we hold on to something past the point where it fits us or suits our soul, we may be forced to let go. Again, the south node is the headless body. The body is where we store memories. This is where the idea of past lives comes in, and past life karma. Yeah. But again, both of the nodes in our chart, when we have transits to the nodes, or we're working with the nodes, or we have a nodal return, there's a certain amount of discernment that's required because they can distort and deceive. So that's just the nodes of the moon in a chart. Here's a one little example. You can go through all of the different houses and signs and think about where the nodes are in your chart. But for example, my experience of folks who I've done readings for who have the nodes of the moon in the first and the seventh house, they can tend to get a lot of experience in their life and deal with karma or their internal patterns of repeated behavior around relationships. The first house has to do with me. Seventh house has to do with other partner, one-on-one relationships. So the nodes in those houses may require you to, or may involve you getting or being in relationship or learning about who you are, the first house, through having relationships with other people. So that's a very simple explanation, and you can go through all the other houses and you can go through each of the signs, but that's a topic for another day. Today, we're going to focus on planets when they appear at the bending. And what does that mean? So you saw this is the diagram I had on an earlier slide where we see that the nodes happen where the ecliptic comes into contact with the lunar path or the path of the moon around the earth, and where the south bending is the point where the moon on its path reaches its maximum latitude south of the ecliptic. So we see down here 5 degrees 17 minutes, and a planet at the south bending sits roughly 90 degrees counterclockwise from the south node, marking that point where its latitude is at the lowest point. So think of the south node as being brought low, or the bending of the south node. You see how the moon has come down. We're going to see symbolically that matters for the astrological interpretation. The north bending is the point where the moon reaches its maximum latitude north of the ecliptic, 5 degrees 17 minutes, marking the point where its latitude is its maximum point above the ecliptic. So think of being brought high. And there's a way in which, excuse me, my throat, you can think about this as the idea of being out of balance almost. That, see if I can bring this. Oh, I drew a beautiful line. I've got to figure out how I get over to the left. Excuse me. I'll do fit to screen. There we go. Out of balance. The sun and the moon, you can think of the sun as our consciousness and the moon as the unconscious, or those embodied experience, what it is to be human. And when we're at the bendings, we are at this point where we've maybe gone too far, either come too far down in our experience, and distorted understanding of what's happening for us, and we're maybe a little deflated around our understanding of that particular point, or come too far up and we're inflated the way the ego can get inflated and think it's all that. The moon is far from its conscious understanding of reality. So that might sound a little deep. I think you're going to get a better understanding of it as we go to the next few slides. So that's just an introductory slide. So let's talk about that idea a little bit more. So here you see that with a planet at the south bending, if you see this arrow down, the planet is brought low, and it may have a distorted sense of what it lacks. It may be deflated. If you understand that psychological term, there's 2 ways the ego can handle having difficulties in the world. And you'll know this if you're a human being. The mind can tend to explain to itself. It can either say, I'm kind of really bad. I'm no good. I'm shit, let's say. And that's, you could say, the psychological term of being deflated. And that's not real, right? It's having a distorted understanding of reality, thinking you're worse than you are. The other thing the ego or the mind can do to try to calm itself, if it feels out of connection with the deeper sense of who it is or reality, is it can get inflated. It can try to make up for its feelings by thinking I'm all that. It can identify with God or spirit and get inflated, have hubris, think it's all that, and that's a distortion of reality too. So you see this idea where the nodes of the moon can bring a distortion of reality. And at the bending of the south node, we can think we're not enough. And at the bending of the north node, or if when we have a planet at the north node, we can overvalue that planet and need to learn lessons, perhaps of humility, and adjust our understanding around the energy of that planet. So, as I probably mentioned, I'm not sure I did. My first introduction to the bendings of the moon was at a talk in 2020 at NORWAC from Sam Reynolds, who has Mars at the south bending. And I'm just going to read from the slide to give you a sense of that planet at the south bending, make sure I get all the points. So a planet at the south bending can feel pulled downward or weighed down as if its strength is muted or not fully valued. It often shows places where we start life feeling unsure, overcompensating, or struggling with an old pattern connected to the planet. But with guidance, the planet at the south bending can learn to value its capacity and to express itself in the world responsibly. And so Sam Reynolds, when he was talking about the bendings, talked about the fact that he has Mars at the South Bending, and he is 4'11". He's short, and he talked about the fact that when he was a young boy, how he overcompensated for this feeling of not being big enough by picking fights. So as a child, he said he often acted out through anger and fighting, getting into a lot of conflicts at school. Being very small for his age, he was picked on a lot, which pushed him either to defend himself or strike first. He described himself as a kid who would walk past a bully's desk and say, "Your mama," just to start a fight. Concerned but determined, his father put him in the boxing ring to try and help with this, believing that structured training could help discipline his anger and channel his Mars. And it helped. Sam talks about in when he gave the talk on this. He viewed his Mars at the South Bending as a placement that emerged early as raw anger, impulse, and a need to defend or assert himself. And he explains that this Mars needed guidance, support, and discipline, not suppression, so it wouldn't run his life. And boxing became the tool that helped him redirect and stabilize this energy, offering mastery rather than chaos. So there's a way in which, and I really resonated with this, I have Saturn at the South Bending, and questions around boundaries and restrictions have been a real battle for me. And I very much benefited from my Jungian analyst, who actually is an Aquarius rising. So Saturn rules his chart. One of the things he's really done to help me is help me understand and give me examples of and help me work through and teach me how to set boundaries in my life and limits on other folks. And so there is this way with planets at the South Bending that having a mentor who helps train you in this energy, who helps shore up any deficiency you may feel around that particular planet can be really helpful. And then we can look at another chart, which is the chart of Drew Barrymore, who has Sun at her north bending. This is something I have in my chart as well. Again, I really resonated with her experience in different ways. So if we look at Drew Barrymore's chart, we can see that the Sun is 90 degrees counterclockwise from her north node. And that's what makes her Sun at the north bending. I'm going to go back to Sam Reynolds' chart because I should show you too that the easiest way to understand if you have a planet at the north or south bending is count 90 degrees to counterclockwise from the node. And if there's a planet there, it's going to be at that bending. So here we have the south node, and at the south bending, we have Mars for Sam Reynolds. We can also see that if we count counterclockwise from the north node, that he has the moon at the south bending. Now, that is not he considers it in his talk to be at the South Bending, but really it's in Leo. It's not in Cancer. So I don't know. I am a little bit more strict about that and might not say his moon was at the North Bending. In any event, you get the idea. So going back to Drew Barrymore's chart, she has the Sun 90 degrees counterclockwise from the north node. So it's at the north bending. A planet at the north bending can show energy that rises up and gets big fast. Remember that the illustration of with the north node. I'm going to go back to that because I feel like I really want you to see that. At the north bending, we have it's gone up quickly, right? It's to the left, and this planet has moved up in the world. It's rising up. At the south node, it's moving down. So at the north bending, um, a planet can show energy that rises up and gets big fast. It can bring a strong push toward visibility, recognition, or feeling out front with that part of yourself. It learns over time to regulate the raw energy of the North Node, which can bring inflation. So it learns to humble itself, basically to restate that, because that writing was not super clear. Is that somebody with a planet at the North Node, when they're young, they might have been the golden child around that particular planet, and it might have been too much energy for them. They might have gotten inflated. They might have found that their parents thought they were amazing around that thing, and their ego got identified with that part of who they were, and they can go too hard, too fast, till they learn how to deal with that energy, learn how to humble themselves. There's something about North Node bending planets where a need to learn a little humility is part of the deal, in my experience. So think about Drew Barrymore. She was born to the famous acting family. Her grandfather was John Barrymore. And with her family background, she got into acting at a really young age and became super famous super quick at the age of 6, I believe. Oh, 7. She starred in E.T., right? Her early fame came with serious challenges. She was drinking by the age of 9, using drugs by the age of 12, and entered rehab at the age of 13. And her story shows this dramatic early rise followed by a very public fall, and shaped by fame arriving far too fast for a child to manage. But then she went on and developed some wisdom around that energy. Um, she eventually learned how to negotiate that ambitious Rahu North Node hunger, and to tone it down. Her intense rise showed that solar push toward recognition before she had the grounding to handle it. But as an adult, she slowly learned to balance that strong solar energy, rebuilding her life and career with more stability. Now she's a producer and an entrepreneur, and she has her own talk show. And if you see her, she's just more grounded, right? There's a way in which Rahu can get us ungrounded, let's say, and coming down to earth is part of the what can be necessary. The last thing I'd like to show you is how transit charts might be affected by um, by a planet square the nodes. So what a transit chart is, on the inner wheel here, this is a chart of a client of mine. I'll tell you her story in a minute, but first, to explain, the inner wheel is her birth chart. The outer wheel is the transits from a particular day where she had a big experience. And in transit charts, when we have a planet square the nodes, it can feel like a moment of choice, because the planet can see arguably each of the nodes, even though they're imaginary points. You're in this middle point, right? Finding that middle path. Where are you going to go next? And for this particular client, what happened was she had a husband. Her husband was a construction worker, and he was working on a building up really high, I believe, on a skyscraper or a tall building. And he took a little bit of a risk, perhaps, and he ended up falling. And it was a bad accident. He ended up in a coma. This was way back in 1995. Um, and we were looking at the chart many years later to understand the meaning of that event a little bit in her life. And one of the things we talked about was that on the day that she had to make a decision, a choice about whether or not to take him off of life support, Uranus, the planet of sudden events, was square the nodes of the moon. And you can see that it was at the north bending, I believe. Yes, it was at the north bending. And, as I said earlier, the north node of the moon can have to do with unknown paths ahead of us. It can have to do with manifesting in this lifetime something new. And so with Uranus at the north bending, it's almost as though she was at this moment of choice that would change the trajectory for the future for her as well as her sons. Somebody in the astrology meetup was pointing out, I believe it was my co-host, that Uranus is in her fifth house of children. And so this was a big decision, not just for herself, but for her three sons. So yeah, you can see this. This is a dramatic example of a planet square the nodes of the moon, but it does give you the sense of that choice point that can happen. Um, yeah. This is just another chart with some of my written thoughts on that. I'm going to leave it up for a second in case you want to read through it, but I believe I've already said most of that. So I am curious, as I said early on, if you have a bending story, if you find out you have a planet at square the nodes of the moon, share it. I'd love in the comments to share a few details and let me know if you resonate with some of the interpretations that we've had here. If you have any other ideas, love to hear it. I'm always learning. I have my South Node in Sagittarius and my North Node in Gemini. So curiosity is a big part of my hunger in this life. So anyway, and finding a balance between thinking I know everything and being curious about new ideas is kind of my middle path. So I hope y'all enjoyed it. If you did, like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon at the next astrology meetup. I'm going to be talking about accidental dignity. I have a series going on right now about planetary dignities. I took a little pause in the middle of it to talk about this topic because it seems so timely. So talk soon and have a great day.